All right. Well, take two. How's everyone doing tonight?
I have more whiskey in me, so I'm doing fine.
I'm
Uh,
okay.
I did not bring a drink. I really should.
You're doing this sober? Oh, that's your first mistake.
See, like when I drink, I just get tired. So then it's like it'll just be a sleepy. Well, should have sleepy reader here because just be a sleepy reader.
I'm having some beer.
There you go.
See?
I'm having
Drink your reader.
Propel. It's 2021, berry flavored. So there we go.
Sponsoring this. Shouldn't.
Exactly. But today, I think we're all talking about this is first time I'm going live on my channel. Although this will probably be posted later because weirdness. But we're going to be talking about Black Hammer Volume 1, and I guess we should try to introduce everyone is because that's how YouTube works. I'm Dan, aka the Comic Concierge. I guess Matt, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Matt. I have a YouTube channel, Wednesday Serial, Serial spelt like the killer, and talk about comics there, and excited to talk about Black Hammer.
G, do you want to do the same?
Yeah, I'm G. I'm from Portugal, and I've been enjoying comics since before I could even read comics. And my YouTube channel is Mind the Comics.
Well, I have to appreciate G for joining us, considering that it's about 3 a.m. in your neck of the woods.
It's a little bit late.
So thank you for joining us. So if you have to head out, I'm past my bedtime and it's only 10:30. So there you go. But we're here because we wanted to do a little kind of like monthly book review. I think we last met, but he'll hopefully be back. Oh, there he is. Talking about Volume 1 of Black Hammer. I know G and I, we've read this before, but Matt, this was your first time joining, right? Reading Black Hammer.
Yeah. And when we were setting this up, I was actually the one who recommended it. Mostly because I have a pile of trades that I keep meaning to get to, and this was literally just at the top of the pile, and I just selfishly was using this as a way to get through my pile.
Nice. Well, hey, I mean, we were talking before about how I don't reread comics nearly as much as I want to, so this gave me a good excuse to do just that. So I guess, G, like obviously this is you've read this before, but going back to read it again, what were your thoughts?
I enjoyed rereading it. I think it's a very well constructed first volume, very easy to get into, and I unfortunately don't remember much of volume 2, so it's almost like reading it for the first time, although it's not. But
yeah,
very enjoyable. Yeah.
Matt, how about you? Obviously, this is what you recommended. You're going through this. What were your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I ran into a problem that I usually seem to have with some of Lemire's stuff, where I felt like I kept waiting for something to happen. It's interesting because I mean, as much as all the dressing of the superheroes and everything is going, this seemed to have very literary ambitions of all the drama in the small town. Despite all the dressing, this read more to me like a Dickens novel than what I'm used to with comics. So I don't know. That's not necessarily a bad thing. I just and it took some adjusting.
I could. It's definitely very different. Like Lemire stuff that tends to hit me really well. I think because of it is often like you're just kind of hanging out with the characters, and especially with this because Black Hammer, the first volume, literally you have this group of former superheroes, whatever you want to call it, that are stuck in this time loop, and they're just kind of hanging out in this town, and you're just getting backstory. And it's also kind of weird going back because knowing what's really happening, and also having the background of a lot of these characters have now had their own series. Just finished the Barbellion miniseries, which was great, and having that backstory compared to this, it's also I don't say they feel like different characters compared to that, but it's just interesting with that knowledge of rereading it. But I do really like this series. I could see what you're saying because it is very deliberate with its pacing and what it's going through. It's really trying to, you know, have you. It's very loose with like its structure in the sense of like what it's telling you it's going to be happening next, and not giving you a lot of direct answers. It's very, and that kind of happens for quite a while with at least the first 2 volumes. I'm trying to remember when things happened, but the thing I think I ultimately like about it is that I feel like I like the characters because they're generally good people, and usually when you see deconstructions of like superheroes, they're often like nihilistic or something like that. But with this, they're they have their flaws, there's some issues, they have their drama, but generally they're people that you can kind of get behind and root for despite that.
That's a really good point, and that's something I don't think I put into enough consideration, because that's something I really buck from. Like, what is it? Indestructible or whatever it was, the Mark Waid Superman.
Yeah, irredeemable and
irredeemable. Yeah. I really buck from that because I mean the character was just so mindlessly evil. It was hard to like take anything that was going on. Here, I mean, these characters aren't always, characters of virtue, but considering their various predicaments, they have an understandable relation. I feel like, sorry, G, before we go to you, I just want to say for those who maybe are unfamiliar with Black Hammer or lapsed, like you guys did, this first volume, we really do just meet this cast of who was superheroes on another planet. They've been transported to this planet. We don't find even the slightest details of that till we're about halfway through this trade. Yeah. And it's just them living in this small town. It sounds like if we were reading anything else, I would just be assuming that we were kind of like talking to the middle of the trade or something. Like, this is where it starts and this is where the entire trade lives. And we don't get much of the background. Like you said, a lot of the characters, whatever, I didn't see because it's in different installations later. So I just wanted to, because if anyone's listening, get them on some page with us.
It's true.
Lemire is very successful in very quickly introducing us to this new world. You read the first issue, the first 20 pages, and you almost immediately know a lot about the basic characters, not about the superheroes behind them, but about those persons. You immediately realize that Slam is very comfortable in that new role of a farmer, and you immediately recognize all the other characters' personal fights with the new life they are having. And Lemire is extremely successful in presenting that very concisely and with great visual help by the great art that is in Black Hammer.
D. Mormonstead is
and although go ahead.
Yeah, D. it's impressive just looking at the way D. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but just the shifting of styles, because of course you have, like, when the book opens, it almost like it's playing on like your knowledge of Lemire if you're a fan of him, because you have this guy in a small town farm, kind of looks like a normal life, and then he's just kind of milking the cow. It's generally slower pace, and then it opens up and he goes into the kitchen, and you have a robot cooking and like a ghost and like an alien hanging out. It's like a good juxtaposition of like small town life with like almost like a sitcom in a weird way with these crazy creatures. And I think it does a good job of utilizing the one-to-one comparison of like knowing, like, obviously like El Barbarian is like Martian Manhunter, but then finding ways to kind of add to it, making and like adding to that dilemma. Gale, can't think of her name, Golden Gal, and how she she's like Shazam, but to make it worse, the fact that she's stuck as a child and this the drama that's there. It's like you said, it's very good point, G, like about very quickly within this, even if you don't know their complete history and what brought them there, their dilemma of what they're facing in the moment in time is pretty clear, outside of maybe the Dragon Lady, who's kind of a mystery for most of this first volume. But I think in general, the central drama is pretty clear right from the beginning.
I did think it was interesting going off what you're saying, like the way that the characters are played. A lot of them feel very akin to kind of B-list DC characters. Golden Gal, Mary Marvel, more directly, I think, than any other.
Mhm.
I'm looking at a list here. So Barb Alien being Martian Manhunter, but is more alien. Like his skin is more. It's not smooth, so that gives something to it, I guess. Colonel Weird being interesting, and then my least favorite named Takiwaki felt underused in some ways. Like it's fun because mostly he's just going around taking care of chores or whatnot, and
Mhm.
acting kind of like the butler on The Fresh Prince, just bemoaning everything and being incredibly sarcastic. It's funny that you said sitcom because that was what kind of got me. Was like the situation here is basically a sitcom, but it's just completely a drama. And that was another thing that I was kind of waiting for it to be a little more fun, I guess, a few more jokes, a little more play with the situation. And it's just misery.
Yeah,
That's kind of
that's good. There's not a lot of
typical right,
yeah.
isn't it? I'm not a big specialist on Jeff Lemire. I never read Essex County. I've never read Sweet Tooth, but all his narratives seem to revolve. Well, maybe with the exception of The Sender and The Sender. That's a kind of space opera, which doesn't take place in a very small town and within a very small family, but everything else in Black Hammer just seems precisely what Lemire always writes about: small town living and the family drama. So I think he's very comfortable with that. Right?
That's exactly what he says in the afterword in the essay here. So, right from his mouth, you are 100%. Yeah.
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 I also like how he mentioned in that. I don't know if it's. I know it's in the. I think it's in either the first issue or maybe that volume. At least in the digital version, that like the reason he picked Dean Ormsted as the artist is because he's not a traditional superhero artist, so his style right away doesn't necessarily flow with like what you would expect from a DC or Marvel heroes. But then, of course, when you actually get into them being part of like their actual world before the Black Hammer world, you see that style shift, and clearly the Kirby. I mean, we didn't mention Jack Kirby, but this is clearly like super inspired by Jack Kirby. And it's not even hiding that. But yeah, I think that's where you get a little bit of the joy. But in general, yeah, it's a very, especially this first volume, it's very melancholy in its tone throughout. There's perhaps you could say it's a bit melodramatic because there is so much there, from unacquainted love to being stuck in this child, or to the dilemma of like being in love with this woman who's also has this bad husband. Speaking of sitcoms, I mean, it's almost soap opera-esque in that same way as well. But I just despite like the familiar framework, I just thought, I guess maybe taking all these things that are familiar, it somehow made something that is somewhat new and weirdly refreshing in that way.
The art is beautiful, and I think we should be all so glad that Lemire wasn't drawing it himself.
Are you not a fan of Lemire's art?
Oh, I am, but in this kind of setting, in a superhero kind of story, I don't think it would work at all.
Yeah. He doesn't either. He didn't choose himself,
Yeah.
I mean, that is something with it being Jeff Lemire, though, and this not being, the early part of his career, is he's choosing his artists. That's awesome, but it's also like, how many more of these smaller comics, that aren't coming from someone who did that, don't get these options. But it's great that this did. And it's funny the way you're talking about it, because when I was reading, I got a feeling less of like Jack Kirby and more of like old EC comics. And that was the vibe I got, especially from like Madam Dragonfly, Takiwaki, Colonel Weird, even though that's obviously Adam Strange. But it's like all these old like parable comics of like people who either did something terrible or there's something terrible going around them and like the consequences thereof. And usually those are in smaller towns and whatnot. And it just hit that end. Dean Orstrom, to me, like if EC Comics was still doing their thing, he feels like he'd be in their wheelhouse. You know, it's
Yeah, that's
just
possible.
what I
I've
think.
never read any EC comics. That's probably why I never got
Oh.
that, because that's one that's out of my wheelhouse. But that's a good point.
And it's not only Dean Ormston. Lemire here is really working with the greatest artists on their field. I mean, it's Dave Stewart on the colors, and it's Todd Klein in the lettering. So you couldn't have a better company.
Yeah, and Stewart does, I think, almost all the colors from most all the Black Hammer books. I mean he does mostly all Dark Horse, really, because he, of course, does a lot with Magnolia as well. So yeah, the Stewart is obviously, you can there's just really talented all across the board, and I think that's why the first volume, well, this entire series, because this first volume basically built an entire new franchise for Dark Horse, which they, of course, desperately needed in a way because they're losing so much, and now they have this whole new universe, and in large part because of that, the foundation that's built here with these general characters, and seeing them just like, you can tell there was this massive plan for this world, and just a lot of the early rumblings are right here, especially with someone like Colonel Weird, and seeing, like, because at that point, because he's such this character that's all over the place and seems kind of random, but I think as it goes on, there's a lot more as it dives more into his character, things start to click a little bit more, and especially when you get maybe I think one of my favorite scenes was when you see him somewhat become normal and have that dinner, and like how you have a book of full superheroes and it's like alien creatures and robots that talk, and one of the most dramatic moments is at dinner. I think that's kind of like, that to me emphasizes pretty much Jeff Lemire in a nutshell, like being able to make small moments with big characters.
Yeah, and that dinner to me hit that like sitcom idea, and it's interesting because I was talking about all the characters being miserable, but the one character who isn't is Tammy Trueheart, who's the woman who was invited over to dinner by Abraham, who's kind of our father figure in this, and he's putting some of the characters kind of in their corner because you can't hide the fact that Takiwaki's a robot, so he has to go away. And he told earlier, like, Colonel Weird, like, please just don't be here tonight. I don't know how to explain you. And then when he shows up and saves the day, because Golden Gale is being a brat about it, it's this big deal. But it's not just that he shows up and he's pleasant. He's physically different. He's normally depicted as this frail, like dying, bald, white mustached man who's got crazy eyes and is like doesn't know when he is exactly. And then he shows up, he's put together, he's built like a linebacker or quarterback or some fit guy. I don't know my football.
Either works, linebacker.
Yeah. And it's just like, smooth, talking everything down perfectly great. And then when he shows up again the next day, it's back to his old wild self. And it's, I was almost disappointed with that though, because I was waiting for something to like crack and this woman to either freak out or like roll with it, again, waiting for something to happen. And it's like, we have this tension build up and then it's just kind of alleviated instead of something hitting the skids. And that's interesting because, I mean, this is a Dark Horse book. If Lemire was trying to write this at another publisher, there'd be editors saying something's got to happen. This book couldn't exist at a number of other publishers. So it's interesting that it is so toned down in the world of modern comics, because you sure as shoot couldn't do this at Marvel or DC.
No, yeah, you would kind of have to be forced to not take as much time, I think, especially with the structure here, because it's almost like, I'm trying to think of a good show comparison, but how the structure of it will go back, and you take 2 steps forward, 1 step back, because then you get a new issue and a new focus. Like this issue is about Dragon Lady and her backstory, and even though you have this central mystery that's always in the background of like why are they there, like that Lost-esque kind of like why are they on the island, in the sense of like it's never the main focus until really even the end. Like I think it gets kind of, even though you think that would be what the story is about, it really isn't. It's obviously about the characters and their dilemmas, even if it's kind of futile because they're it's in this weird situation. But I think if you were a DC and Marvel book, you'd have to have the stakes being huge. Like they if they don't get out of this, the world's all going to end because everything needs to be massive. But here they're relatively small. It's just people just trying to have normal human relationships, or just seem like normal human beings in a town that is is in the your typical American town, or whatever you want to qualify it.
Yeah.
I really like the Cardinal Weird character. Not only he brings to the story the kind of clever gimmick that will allow the story to progress, but his visuals are so out there. He's not only Adam Strange, it's like he's also a little bit of Doctor Strange in that dimensional visual craziness. And there's a very cool panel which I would like to see more of this. Here with Colonel Weird.
Oh yeah.
Gutter. And I find that so cool because the gutter is really a place of space and time. It's where in the comics medium the story progresses in space and time without your precise visual indication. It's when the story happens in your head, and watching Weird crossing that space is really a cool visual gimmick. And then he's also his story is so dramatic also. It's probably the most dramatic of them all, to the point where he lost his mind, in a way, right? So very cool character.
Yeah, you can kind of like dismiss him because he just seems like this weird, the pun, this weird character that's just kind of off the wall. But once you get a little bit more understanding of him, I do like him. I think would you say that's your favorite character is Colonel Weird?
Hard to say, but probably yes. And I like Walkie Talkie too.
yeah. I don't know why I'm partial. I think because maybe it's like the analog. I don't know who Abraham Slam's like analog would be in DC. Maybe. I guess I always compared him like Captain America, but it doesn't really fit. So I do enjoy like his story, but I don't know. It's hard for me. I was trying to think of what my favorite character is, and I don't know if I have one. Not that, but yeah, I do really like that. The visually, the Dean Ormsted really came alive in that issue of the series, where especially that one panel too, like you mentioned, and then there's the one where like the body's coming apart and like in all different sections of like the skin and the muscles and everything like that. And even though it's like it should be gruesome, I think it's not, in the sense of like it seems more scientific than it does like horrific or anything like that. But,
yeah, Abraham Slam is probably the hardest character to compare to an analog in the Marvel or DC world. He's kind of an amalgam of many different characters.
He's like a little wildcat, like
right. He's not a national symbol. He doesn't seem to have the Captain America's rightness, and he's not exactly Daredevil even. And
no,
there is a gun. So that's kind of weird.
Yeah, true. I mean, maybe that's why he was the main focus for the most part. It's because he didn't have that direct analog right away. But
it reminds me a little bit of maybe a Kree warrior.
Yeah.
Visuals,
Yeah. Good point. Anything else anyone had to bring up that we didn't discuss or go over thus far?
You guys started to bring up a lot of stuff I hadn't really considered, is making me think about it a bit differently, which I really appreciate. That's what makes this sort of thing so wonderful, is getting the kind of perspective, especially, that bit about like the bit through the panels and analogous to how you read a comic, like that was gold.
Do you think, Matt, you'll continue with the second volume, or do you think you're...
I'll get to it soon.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's sitting right behind me along with some other things. I have my ROM homework I have to finish first, and then we'll get there.
I mean, I think it is a pretty quick read too, and I think, do you think it would be a book that you would recommend to someone who's not typically a superhero fan, considering that's not the story? Someone who doesn't like is turned off by superheroes. Do you think that type of person would enjoy a book like this?
When I started the first issues, I started seeing, like, like you said, we were going to get parallels per character and whatnot. I feel like having kind of that superhero knowledge of what character or kind of pop culture idea this is taking from leads you to it, because I mean that's where the covers and the connections are, because there are flashes to them as superheroes, and if you don't have that, I feel like it would be so distracting, I guess. And if you're looking for something more small town or whatever, I'd probably want to push like an Essex County, or at least a Southern Bastards or something, something that's not playing in that milieu. At first, though, where was I going with that? I thought it was going to be a bit more like Planetary, way into it, and then it didn't end up like that at all. So interesting splits there.
Yeah.
There's another thing I really like in Black Hammer. The main plot is very mundane in a way. The problems of the characters are, well, not exactly mundane, but are real problems, real life problems. But when talking about their origins, there's a very golden age and kind of the age of innocence in comics, because everything happens very easily. Barbarian using Mars, they are visited by an Earth ship, and they seem to know absolutely nothing about the Earth, but it just takes the ship and gets to the Earth in no time. The same thing with Colonel Weird. He has a very 1950s looking ship, and he travels to God knows who in space. And all their origins have that kind of early comics innocence, where everything can happen without being explained. And I like that in comics,
Yeah, that's a very good point. It didn't. That's it. I didn't even think about that, but that's true. Like it is just like this is happening, and like he has Barbarian comes, and obviously the police officer is killed, and he just kind of takes up his life, and then there's it's just like you kind of have that accepting. You don't have the details of like let me like this character is a totem of a million other characters. That's why they're a hero. Their story is a little bit more simplified, which makes things. I do miss that in a bit. That's a good point about the simplicity and it makes sense then to have them go to this town that is, reveling in the simplicity of life as well. Kind of lost in time in a bit. Awesome. But yeah, so yeah, I'm glad you definitely picked this, Matt, because it's fun going back and rereading it, especially like I would say even if like you wanted to check out the like if you want like just to try and see what some of the minis are like without getting like the ones that are focused on characters, I think you could do that. It might ruin a little bit because once you I would advise just reading the first volumes through first, because then you kind of learn like what exactly is happening and the mystery behind it. That might turn you off depending upon your satisfaction with the answer. But I at least think with the journey there, like it really, I think it develops really well, and it was fun going back and seeing just the beginning of it, and seeing these characters kind of established right away.
Cool. So,
Have you guys read other Lemire stuff like Essex County, Sweet Tooth?
Yeah, I've read a lot of Lemire stuff. Essex County is probably probably my favorite comic ever. Up there.
Really?
all right.
I really love Essex County. I've enjoyed Descender and Ascender. I loved his work. Like we mentioned Sweet Tooth, Gideon Falls. It was really good. Trying to think, Black Hammer, as we mentioned. I really enjoy his some of his DC work in Marvel work, like his Animal Man with was it Travel Foreman. That was really good. Part of 52, and his Marvel work is very hit and miss. Like his X-Men stuff was not good, but I feel like that was probably a lot to do with editorial at the time. But his Old Man Network, yeah.
I'm sorry, I heard a Jeff Lemire interview where he says that he usually spends a week writing the script for one of his indie comics, and that he only spends 4 or 5 hours when writing a script for Marvel or DC. And I found that so disrespectful for Marvel and DC fans. I mean, if you only spend 4 or 5 hours on it, you could probably spend a little bit more and make it a greater story. I don't know.
Yeah, potentially. I mean, I did really like his Old Man Logan run for Marvel and his Green Arrow, like specifically when he's partnering with Andre Sorrentino.
I was gonna say his Green Arrow stuff was pretty good.
Yeah.
Maybe he spent 6 hours on those, so it was okay.
I have met him before briefly at Baltimore Comic Con. He was very nice and great. He was sitting next to Matt Kent, who they're like their best friends. I assume, I don't know, they seem to work with each other. But yeah, Jeff Lemire is one of my favorite writers. I don't love everything he does, but actually on my channel I have a top 10 video of my top 10 favorite Lemire stories, and Black Hammer is like number 2 on that. I kind of cheated and combined everything, but yeah, I do think he does shine more so with his indie work, and especially I tend to prefer him when he's writing and drawing his own stuff. But as mentioned, I don't think like Black Hammer would fit his style at all. I don't think it would work nearly as well with him as the artist. Not that I dislike his art, I like it, but it's just not like obviously he knew the point where. Yeah.
Have you seen his character designs for Black?
Yeah.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah.
I mean,
It's a good starting point.
yeah.
But Matt, have you enjoyed Lemire's work in the past? I know you mentioned like Green Arrow, but anything else that?
Yeah, I mean, like I read Green Arrow, I read his X-Men stuff. I haven't read too much of his indie stuff. I think I read Descender forever ago, and I don't think I was super taken with it. And this, and I don't know. I don't think I've actually read a ton of his stuff, and based on what I have read, I feel like, kind of feeling around and easing into it. There's a lot of other creators I know I want to dig into a bit more first. So
Yeah.
That's where I've just gotten, is like there's so much I want to read. It's like, it's not that I want to like put this off necessarily. It's just like I know I have a million things to read before I'd even consider something else like that I'm a little mild on.
Makes sense. All right.
And
Anything else before
by the end of volume 1, we even had Swamp Thing, right? And I'm also very interested to know about what happens to this character, which probably is Madam's Butterfly, is a big drama, right? But this is a huge homage to comics by Jeff Lemire.
Yeah.
And I think that this is a book you could recommend to someone new in comics, because most people nowadays know a bit about superheroes and this thematic, and I think it could work as a fine starting point. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I think if you're not a superhero fan, I think you might enjoy it because it is, although it takes a lot from superheroes. I feel like it is, like I said, I feel like it's deconstruction of superheroes, but in a way that makes you not hate the characters that are in it, or unlike Watchmen, which is fantastic. I'm not saying it's good as Watchmen, but Watchmen's great, but the characters are all horrible human beings. It's kind of nice just to read something that these people are clearly flawed and damaged, but they're not bad people for the most part.
Yeah.
And it is an easy read, right?
Yeah, it's a pretty
Unlike
good.
Watchmen.
Yeah, I read the volume 1 like today. It was a pretty straightforward read. Again, obviously.
A slightly different question for you too. Do you have like a go-to kind of list of comics that you recommend to people when people ask you like, oh, I want to try comics, but I don't know where to look?
For bande dessinée, for European comics, I always recommend two books written by Hugo Pratt, the writer of Corto Maltese, and drawn by Hugo Manara. It's Indian Summer, which is published in English, some old editions, and El Gaúcho. And in the indie side, I like to recommend Craig Thompson's books, Blankets or Abibi. I think they are really, really nice.
Okay.
Blankets is one I tend to recommend too. I usually ask, what do you want to read? If it's superheroes, typically I'll recommend Justice League: A New Frontier. I feel like because it's a pretty self-contained, easy to get into book. Ultimate Spider-Man as well, because I feel like it's like the modern day. I mean, I guess it's a little aged now since it's like 20 years old, but it's a really long run that you can jump into. And it's you don't need most of the Ultimate stuff. Unlike the other Ultimate stuff, it doesn't really get tied into anything else. It's usually one of my go-tos as well. And then depending upon like what else they like, if they like crime, usually criminal, obviously with Edward Baker and John Phillips, because again that's like massive and it's easy to read. And then then some of the more modern stuff like the March trilogy, if they're into like history or anything like that, or and my favorite thing is monsters. Just kind of it depends, but like superhero wise, it's usually like New Frontier, Ultimate Spider-Man, because I feel like those are two really they have a lot of iconic characters in them, and they're pretty welcoming to their readers. How about yourself?
Normally when I talk to people, they don't want to read superheroes, and I'm afraid to jump down that road. But normally when I recommend something, it's one of two ways, depending on like the sense I'm getting from the person. It's either Saga or Preacher.
There's some similarities between those, but obviously but they're very different books.
I've recommended Saga to a couple of books too. And in superheroes, I also usually recommend Batman: The Long Halloween. Or
That's
Batman Hero.
Quality.
I think those are kind of easy to get into.
Yeah.
I guess I take it back. If someone asks superheroes, I usually say Spider-Man Coming Home. That's just such a perfect trade.
I never read that. Who wrote that?
That's the first J. Michael Straczynski JRJR bit. And those 6 issues are a tight story. If you haven't read that, you gotta.
I never do. There's I have a pretty big holes in my comic book reading, because I'll read for there's from 2008 to 2012, 11 or so. I didn't read comics really that much, and then similar for I got back into it around 2004, but there's a lot of but there's still some stuff I missed in that time.
Yeah, that probably would have been in that hole. But it a huge chunk of that run is considered by many to be among the best Spider-Man of all time, and
nice.
I don't know.
I'll add that to the list. But yeah, Saga's a good one to recommend too. And now I just feel sad because it's not current. Hopefully it'll come back soon.
Yeah, right. Well, they gotta finish it, right?
Maybe after the Why the Last Man series is either films or is released. I don't know. Maybe that's what's keeping Brian K. Vaughan up at night. So.
Oh God, I hope not. I always get weird about adaptions. I wish they'd stop almost. Like, just give me the comics. I don't need the lesser.
Yeah. My only hope is it'll hopefully bring more people to read it. I mean,
That's true.
Because it's like we saw that actually with the Disney Plus shows, is that unlike the movies, it seems to actually get people to read more comics because they were running out of, like, they couldn't keep anything related to WandaVision in stock. Same thing with, like, you know, Captain America: Winter Soldier. They're gonna finally release again the Truth Red, was it Black, Red, and White or whatever, that hasn't been released in like a decade. So hopefully that'll happen with Y.
I heard they were reprinting that. I've also heard some reports from analysts that say you do see people getting into comics because of the movies. Just sometimes it's delayed for a few obvious reasons. There's no ads in the movies, kind of lead you there. If someone goes into a comic shop, what comic shop are they walking into? It might be one of the bad ones. If someone goes to digital, is there any way to, like, there's easy ways to trace that, but they don't release or show any of those numbers, so we wouldn't know. And so it's,
Yeah.
but you see the effects kind of afterwards, and like they help.
Yeah.
But maybe not as directly as as the shows have.
Yeah. I mean, like, you saw, I know when, like, Civil War came out, you saw more, like, the trades of Civil War sold really well. So maybe different ways. But all right. So I guess we can wrap this guy up.
Cool.
G, if people want to, you meant, I know we did it in the front of the show, but if people came in late, if people wanted to find more of your stuff, or you online, where be the best place to go?
I'm on YouTube and Twitter under my the comics.
Awesome. Matt, how about yourself?
I'm not so good with branding, so Wednesdays cereal spelt like the killer on YouTube, and then this bid on Twitter till I get that account banned. Then we'll see.
I am Comic Concierge, obviously, on my channel. You can check me on Twitter at Concierge Comic, because I'm also not good at branding and getting names that work. Also, recently, because I'm trying to, I guess, having a midlife crisis, I've joined TikTok, and I am on Comic Concierge on there as well. And on Instagram, but I don't use Instagram nearly as much as I probably should.
What do you do?
Thank you all for joining us tonight. It was fun. Hopefully, we'll do this again relatively soon. Thank you, G, for staying up so late.
How do you do TikTok with comics?
I'm sorry?
How do you do TikTok with comics?
How do I do? I just kind of just like short videos on, like, whatever. I release most of them too on YouTube as a YouTube short video. So
okay.
like just either review a comic, something.
Excellent.
I mean, you can't. It's usually just a minute. You can only go, I think, 3 minutes is the maximum. So I'm still kind of getting used to it. It's different. It's very different world, comic book world that I'm seeing there. Like, what people are into. I don't know how much longer I'll be onto it, because it's a lot of, like, who would win in a fight, and my response is, like, I don't really care who would win in a fight. That's not my thing. It's all made up. It's whoever the writer wants. But I keep seeing those. I'm like, I don't. You guys take this stuff way, way too seriously, in the weirdest, not the ways. I guess I probably take it seriously too, but in a very different way. So,
I thought you were just grabbing a comic and doing a dance with it. So
yeah, there's that too. The comic shuffle. I'll start one of those trends. I am a trendsetter, but not really. I actually join trends when they're mostly all done and over with, and people are on to other things. It's usually my go-to.
All right.
Well, thanks everyone. Hope you guys have a great night, and
Okay.
I will end the stream.